This is a compilation of 24 of the most used acronyms of the retail leasing commercial real estate industry. My name's Hugh Chen. I'm the president of Saglo Companies. We own and operate shopping centers, and I've been in the business for 25 years. I personally did retail leasing for the first 12 years of my career. So these are all the things that I'm trying to educate the new people that are coming into the industry about. This is actually a part of the answer key series that I made that gave the answers for the first and second year retail leasing proficiency test. So any of the first and second year retail leasing associates, they can take this test. The test is, I'll link it below, it's on my LinkedIn, and then come here and look for the answers for them. So I'm breaking up the answers in a few parts, mainly because I'm just doing the answers 5-10 minutes here and there. I have a full-time job. I'm running the company, Saglo Companies, and trying to do the best that I can. As you go through the video, you'll notice that I don't just give you the definition or what the acronym means. I actually go in for anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes on a little bit of deep dive on what each acronym, how it's used in the business actually. So even if you're not brand new to the industry, I would encourage you to still watch this video. I know it's quite long. It's actually a compilation of multiple videos I did before. I hope you find it useful, and that was the purpose of it. This is just the first part of the compilation, and I'll make similar compilations for the other parts of that leasing associate test as I'm able to complete those. So probably in the next few months. I am a pretty new YouTube channel. I started it April of 2025, so just a few months before recording this today. I could really use a lot of help in building awareness of the channel, especially if you find it useful. I think that it could be pretty useful for anyone just starting out. It could also be pretty useful for students in the commercial real estate sector that want to get in. So please, if you don't mind, like, subscribe, and reshare. Send it to anyone that you think that this could be useful. The more views that I get, it helps the algorithm and gives me positive feedback to try to create more content that is helpful, educational, and brings a little bit more in-depth analysis to our commercial real estate industry. And without further ado, let's get started. What does NNN mean? It means net of CAM, net of real estate taxes, and net of insurance. Triple net. So what is that? It means that it is a type of lease structure, a triple net lease structure in a lot of commercial leases. And the difference between a triple net lease and a full service lease or a gross lease is that when a tenant in this lease structure gets charged their rent, the rent charges are separated. They have their base rent, then they have their operating expenses, or the triple nets. And CAM is common area maintenance. That includes all the costs to maintain the common areas of the property, between landscaping, cleaning, portering, trash, maintenance, R&M, things like that. And then obviously insurance would be the insurance of the common areas, not the interior insurance, but the insurance of the building, the general liability, and things like that. And then the real estate taxes would be self-explanatory, the real estate taxes of the property. And those real estate taxes, usually a savvy landlord, they're going to hire a consultant or an attorney or something like that to make sure that the real estate taxes are the lowest that they can be. So they're always monitoring what the property is appraised at and seeing if it's a fair assessment, and to see if there's a way to lower it. So the triple net lease is a little bit different than, let's say, in office buildings and industrial buildings. You have more full service or gross leases or over the base year leases, and certainly with multifamily it's just one rent, which is the gross rent. This is something that makes retail commercial real estate a little bit different, is that almost all of the leases are on triple net leases. And that's also a reason why they think that, or a lot of investors feel that the commercial real estate, especially shopping centers on a triple net lease structure, is a great hedge for inflation, because if the operating expenses go up, then those increased operating expenses can be passed along to the tenants. So if insurance goes up, if your landscaping, whatever goes up, then that's all a pass-through expense. And that's what the NNN stands for, triple net lease. And FF&E stands for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And in the commercial real estate world, it is usually describing restaurant equipment, but it can also describe coin laundry equipment or any other equipment-heavy types of use categories. So back in the day when I was doing leasing, when you asked someone if their startup costs included FF&E, or maybe you would ask them, what did they have planned for their FF&E? You were referring to furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And in the restaurant space, that could be a pretty significant amount. So for a 4,000 square foot restaurant, the FF&E alone, might be $500,000, or maybe $1 million. And so it's something to really be mindful, especially when you're negotiating with those types of businesses. A coin laundry, the FF&E can easily be $1 million, because the machinery that they're putting in is very substantial. A lot of it is leased, so that's another thing that you might want to ask about. Hey, is the FF&E leased, or do you own it outright? Because if it's leased or if it's financed, more often than not, they're going to ask the landlord, if you're representing the landlord, for a landlord lien waiver. Because in a retail lease, unless there's a lien waiver, a landlord lien waiver, the landlord actually has first lien rights on all of the FF&E that the tenant puts into the space. So if the tenant were to vacate overnight, then the landlord has first lien rights on everything in there. And if there was another company that financed or leased, like let's just say a refrigerator or something like that, and they didn't get the landlord lien waiver, well, hey, look, the landlord's got first lien. The equipment's in the landlord's property, and they got first lien rights. So tough luck. You should have got a lien waiver. So that's kind of how it works. BOMA. So you pronounce that as BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Association. So what is that? That is really more geared for office buildings, maybe industrial as well. Not as many retail people are within BOMA, but one of our property management executives are. And it is a great organization that brings together a lot of the professionals within the office space and the industrial space, a little bit of retail. They share best practices. You can get vendor references and things like that. They also have networking events, conferences, and such. Also, within retail, you'll hear often that and this I think goes for pretty much all spaces within retail, all leased premises, that the premises itself is measured to BOMA standards. And what that means is that when you're renting a 1,000 square foot space that's 20 feet wide by 50 feet deep, the way that they measure it is not from the interior surface of the wall to the interior surface of the wall. Actually, for shared walls, meaning that there's another space, another tenant adjacent to that space. For shared walls, they actually measure from the center point of that wall, the midpoint of the wall, and so you have to add, I think, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches for that wall. And then on the other wall, if that's also shared, then it's also from the center point of that wall, in the middle of the wall. And then for non-shared walls, which is usually your front of the space and the back of the space, you go all the way to the exterior. So you add about 6 to 8 inches, maybe 8 inches on the back and the 8 inches on the front. So what you end up doing is you when you look at interior space versus to BOMA standards, then you're adding maybe a foot of width and maybe a foot and a half of length. So you have a little bit higher square footage. And what oftentimes, if you're a leasing associate, what would happen is if you lease to like a local tenant that's not familiar with this, they'll have their flooring guy go in, and the flooring guy will say, hey, this is only 900 square feet of flooring, and then the tenant will come to the landlord and say, hey, I thought I leased 1,000 square feet. Why is it 900 square feet? Then you'd have to explain, well, no, the space is measured to BOMA standards, which is the center point of the shared walls to the exterior wall of the non-shared walls, and that's why it's not the usable square footage. So that's a little bit of a background with BOMA. CAM, so that stands for CAM, which you might be familiar with because it's used in a lot of different asset types, including apartments and things like that. And what that stands for is common area maintenance. And within the shopping center space, if you think of an open air shopping centers, it is all of the space or all of the surface area and real estate that does not service an individual tenant. So the parking lot is part of the common area, the walkways are part of the common area, the roof is part of the common area, and so forth, the landscaping and the retention ponds and ingress and egress and things like that. So what would not be considered common area would be anything within the tenant's space, or if it only services that tenant. So for example, with shopping centers, air conditioning units that service only that one tenant, that's not common area because it only services that tenant, which is a little bit of a difference between the retail asset type and office or industrial, where maybe in an office building you have one HVAC unit that services the whole building or multiple floors of tenants, for example. So that would be common area maintenance. And in the retail setting, the tenants, most of the time, almost all the time, the leases are set up so that the tenants of the shopping center pay their proportionate share or reimburse for their proportionate share of the cost to maintain the common area. So that would all be detailed out in their lease. Hope you enjoy. ICSC stands for International Council of Shopping Centers. And that's a trade organization for everybody in retail commercial real estate in the shopping center industry. So who is a part of ICSC? You have the retailers, for sure. You have the real estate managers, the C-suite, a lot of the operations people on the retailer side. Also the landlords, anywhere from institutional to local. You have principals, you have those in the executive management level, leasing, property management, asset management, etc. Brokerages, big and small, investment sales, third-party leasing, and tenant rep, etc. There's capital markets with debt, equity, private lenders. You have the lenders themselves, the relationship managers for various banks. And then you have the service providers, which include GCs, architects, roofing, accounting, attorneys, technology, etc. So those are pretty much probably 90%. Oh, and the municipalities. So you have a lot of municipalities that are a part of ICSC and attend ICSC events, as well as universities that have real estate schools. A lot of the students are part of ICSC, and they get familiar with the industry. So those are all the people that would be attending the ICSC events and part of the platform. There's really four, in my opinion, and this is just me speaking, there's four main pushes that ICSC as an organization does for our industry and for its members. It's a member-led organization. The first thing are the events. You have some of the big events like Vegas, which is the national event, New York, Florida, Those are the top 3 biggest ones. But then you have Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, and a ton of local events across the United States. I find that these events are a super efficient use of your time, just because everyone that you could possibly do business with is there. So you can have, let's say, 20 meetings set up over the course of 2 days, 30 minutes at a time, and still have time to meet additional new people that maybe you didn't set up a meeting with. And so over the course of a 2 to 3 day event, you might end up meeting 200 people. If it wasn't for ICSC bringing all of those people that are in the same industry to the same location or to the same convention hall, it may take you months, if not, a year to meet 200 people that you could potentially do business with. So I find that super efficient use of our time. And also it's like a 10x productivity. Typically if I'm based out of Miami, if I wanted to meet 3 people, that might take up my whole day. But at an ICSC convention, you can meet 30 people that day. Maybe some preset meetings and some impromptu meetings. There's always networking done at the after parties as well. The second thing that ICSC does very well is really the government relations and the government advocacy for our industry. They have the ICSC PAC, Political Action Committee. They are there in Washington, D.C. They do a federal fly-in, and we're in the state of Florida. They actually do a state fly-in as well in Tallahassee, and I'm sure in the other states in the United States, at least the major cities, they are doing the fly-ins for those states as well. And the reason for that is they're trying to keep bad policy off, not approved or not voted in. There's a lot of tons of policy like the carried interest, the B-SALT, and a few other things that could really hurt our industry, and not only our industry, but consequentially affect a lot of communities, and there's a bit of a domino effect with that. And we just make sure we at least inform the elected officials, hey, this is what could happen if these policies were to be enacted. And usually once we paint the picture and communicate what could happen, that's usually enough to make sure our point has been properly delivered. ICSC also provides a great number of tools for commercial real estate, specifically retail shopping center owners and operators to do their business. For example, the one I use the most is probably the ICSC directory. You can look up pretty much, there's about, I think, 30, 40, maybe 50,000 members. I'm not too sure, somewhere in that. Someone can fact check me. But the directory has the contact information for everybody. So if you needed to find the contact information for someone at Blackstone or Brixmor or a retailer like Dollar Tree or PetSmart or Ulta, etc., you can find it over in the directory. So that saves you a ton of time. Otherwise, you're calling, the operator or something like that and trying to call a bunch of people until you get to the right person. So I think that the contact directory by itself is probably worth the membership and will save you, countless hours if you're doing a lot of business. But also they have a bit of like a multiple listing service within ICSC's website now. I think it's called like Marketplace IQ or something like that. That one it's relatively new, so I don't really know a ton about it, but I'll get back to you. I'll speak with the guys at ICSC and maybe we'll do a demo or something. They also have a lot of data that could be helpful for your business. For example, they post the retailer occupancy health ratios. That's one data point, and then they have a lot of data points on the halo effect for bricks and mortar and online commerce. For example, like if a Macy's opens up in a city, there's a halo effect because there's actually an uplift in the online sales of that city that they opened up to bricks and mortar, and the opposite's true. If they close down, then the online sales go down as well. And then they have a whole bunch of news articles and other really great points of references and research items. And the fourth thing that I think ICSC does really well, especially recently, is they really foster the next generation. So they provide scholarships for students to come to the events, and they connect students with mentors that are veterans in the industry. Also, the student rate itself is super cheap. I think it's $50. And you get to go to the events for $50 where it might be normally $1,000. So that's a huge savings. And also that it just exposes our industry, which is, you know, retail leasing, retail investment sales, owner, operator, property management, property accounting, asset management, etc., acquisitions, analyst development, all of those things that the brightest and the best young minds can be. And it exposes it to them at their campuses, because otherwise they might be thinking, hey, you know, if I do commercial real estate, maybe that's apartment buildings or industrial or something. We bring awareness to them, and we actually do a pretty good job. So there's a ton of new bright talent coming into our industry all the time, and ICSC is a big reason for that. And it just brings awareness to college campuses about the shopping center industry and being in retail. So I think that's it. Hey guys, Hugh Chen here again. I hope you're enjoying the video so far. Just a little bit of a plug. So Saglo Companies, which I'm president of the company, we are privately owned. We own 24 shopping centers across most of Florida. We're also in Atlanta, and we're also in Maryland now. We are looking to grow our footprint, so we are looking at markets such as, or states such as Ohio and Pennsylvania, the Carolinas, Alabama even, Tennessee, perhaps Illinois and Indiana, so pretty much east of the Mississippi, with the exception of Illinois. I know Illinois is west of the Mississippi, but we're looking at a lot of those markets. We're based out of Miami, so I would like to find properties where we can get to it fairly easily. So basically a nonstop flight from either Miami or Fort Lauderdale. And we're looking for markets that have low crime rate. It doesn't have to be high income, but low crime rate for sure, that's growing, that has some sort of industry that's driving people to the market. And population growth is a very important thing. We're looking for properties at least 50,000 square feet in gross leasable area, and we can look at properties up to 200,000-300,000 square feet. And if you go to our website, you can get an idea of what we currently own, which is www.saglo.com, spelled SAGLO. Thank you for listening, and let's keep going. NOI. So NOI stands for net operating income. Very important piece of the profit and loss of a financial of a financial statement of a shopping center or any commercial real estate, and for any business for that matter. So when you're looking at within the shopping center space, the NOI, you'll probably find that a lot of asset managers and owners really focus on that. That would be the way you get to NOI is your gross revenue. Actually, if you want to get really technical, it'd be your potential gross revenue, which is what your property could generate in revenue if it was 100% leased, minus your vacancy, so what you have empty, and then that would be your effective gross revenue. But then you take your effective gross revenue, which and that effective gross revenue is the sum of your base rents, your operating expense reimbursements, as well as your miscellaneous income. And then, so all of that, all your income generation, then you would subtract your expenses, and your expenses would be your CAM, your insurance, your real estate tax, your management fees, security, and it could be also non-reimbursable costs, such as professional fees and accounting and legal fees and stuff like that. And so once you take your gross revenue and you subtract your expenses, then you get your net operating income. Before you get to the net operating income, sometimes especially if the property is 100% leased, they might, just for the appraisal purpose, not for internal, but for like if you're trying to get the property appraised or something, they might also reduce it by a general vacancy factor. And maybe I'll get to that a little bit later. That's maybe more advanced, but gross revenue minus expenses equals net operating income. And if you are doing retail leasing, you are really focused on that gross revenue side, making sure that you get the occupancy high, the rents up, etc. If you are on the operations side, you're really working on that expense part of it, trying to get the expenses as manageable as possible. And if you're on asset management, you're looking at both. So that's a little bit of high level look at NOI. CO, so that stands for Certificate of Occupancy. I'm not sure if that term carries throughout the country, but at least in South Florida, when you lease out to a tenant for your shopping center, they do their build out, their construction, so they have to get a permit, or first I guess they have to get drawings done by the architect, then they have to submit the drawings and get a permit to build, and then once they have the permit, they can do the construction. Once they do the construction, then they get the construction inspected by the municipality to make sure that it was constructed according to what they submitted. And then once they have that approval, they get a certificate of occupancy, which means now that they can go in and use the space for their business. Before then, they're not legally allowed to do so. So a lot of times when you're looking at leases and letters of intent, they might cite the date as when they obtained the certificate of occupancy, or their CO for certain things, like maybe it's a contingency, or maybe it's when the rent starts, etc. So that's what CO stands for. CPI, that stands for Consumer Price Index, and it's essentially a measure of the general inflation of the economy. And I think probably everybody has heard of that by now, because inflation's been a big topic. For a long time in my career, inflation was super low, under 3%, but last few years it's been something that we're paying very close attention to. And Consumer Price Index, there's I think a few indexes, but I'm not exactly sure which one we use, but we use the one that's most popular, and it comes out every month, and you enter the index rate, and you figure out how much you need to increase whatever is tied to that index by CPI. And so the way that it's used typically is that if you have a shopping center lease, oftentimes the rent, your base rent of that shopping center lease or that tenant is the annual increase is tied to CPI somehow. Sometimes it's a 3% annual increase, but no less than CPI. So if CPI is like 5%, then it's 5%. And sometimes so that's a floor of 3%, but sometimes there's a ceiling as well, maybe 10% or something like that. But essentially, if CPI is running, and again, that's inflation, so if CPI is running 5% or 6% or whatever, that just means that the cost of like everything that's being measured in the CPI formula is going up by that much. So oftentimes that's rent, that's food, that's gas, that's materials, etc. So that's a little bit of insight on how we use CPI, Consumer Price Index. LOC, and that stands for Letter of Credit. So how do you use letter of credit, and when does it come in? You don't find it that often nowadays. I feel that what it does is it securitizes the lease. So when you're negotiating a proposal or a letter of intent with a tenant, especially a local tenant, you get to the part where you say, hey, I want a personal guarantee for the entire term that you're there, 5-10 years. And they say, no, I don't want to do a personal guarantee. I want to do only a corporate guarantee. You look at the corporation, and maybe it was only started 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe it's a brand new LLC that's only for that location. And you say, no, I need that personal guarantee, and they just won't give it. So One option would be to do a letter of credit, which is basically a bank letter of credit, which basically you have the tenant go to their bank, and the bank issues the landlord a letter of credit saying that, hey, if the tenant defaults on the lease, the landlord can pull the letter of credit from the bank, which is very good because the landlord will be able to pull it, since the bank's essentially saying that it'll pay the money if certain conditions happen. The downside of it is two things. One is that there is a cost associated with having the letter of credit by the tenant, so they'll have to pay for that cost. Secondly is that the money, so let's just say the letter of credit's for $100,000, which might be worth 6 to 12 months of rent. That letter of credit, that $100,000 is tied up in the tenant's account typically, so meaning that it's essentially frozen for as long as the letter of credit exists. And also the letter of credit's usually for a 1-year term, so you have to make sure there's a mechanism that forces them to renew it every year for as long as you agree to have it. And then there's also a mechanism on the landlord side to make sure that you're checking to see that that has been renewed. So because if it hasn't been renewed, now you don't have a letter of credit, you don't have a personal guarantee, and you're kind of out of luck. So so those are some nuances there. You can also address the guarantee issue by 6-month security deposit or 12-month security deposit. That's very popular as well. All right, thank you. NPV, net present value. That is a formula that takes into account the time value of money. In retail leasing, the way that is used is really to compare a lease to, let's say another lease. Let's say you have 2 or 3 different leases and you want to figure out which one gives you the highest net present value. Or sometimes you're comparing your potential lease that you're deciding whether or not you want to do with the budget. So you're talking to your asset manager and trying to figure out what the space was budgeted at. And oftentimes to give you a mathematical answer, you're using the net present value. And the concept of the net present value leans heavily on time value of money, meaning that dollars that you get, let's say 5 years from now, are worth less than dollars that you get today. And certainly the dollars that you spend today and that you're investing in on the onset of the deal are worth a lot more than if you were needing to invest money later on in the deal. And I'll give you an example of how it might work. Let's just say that you had a budget of leasing out a vacancy, and you had a $15 a square foot tenant improvement allowance as your budget, 4 months of downtime or a build out time, and a $20 per square foot rent with 3% annual increases. But the deal that you have teed up looks a little bit different. Maybe it's a lot heavier in TI. Perhaps it's $40 a square foot in TI because maybe it's a salon suites or something. And it's maybe 10 months of downtime because there's a lot of construction that needs to be done. But your rental rate might be $30 a square foot, and maybe your annual increases are 15% every 5 years. And let's just say both of these are 10-year deals. Then the question would be, which deal do you go with? So you can take 2 approaches. One is NPV and the other is IRR. Well, let's just go with the NPV approach on this particular case. You would then build out every year what your cash flows are. The first year you're out a lot of money because you're out $40 a square foot when you're and 10 months of downtime when you're only bringing in $30 a square foot. But then you're getting a lot more rent for each of the 10 years along the way. But the money that you laid out in year 1 is worth a lot more than the extra money that you're getting, let's say in year 7 or 8 or 9 or even 10. And so you have to factor in which one's better. And so you build out the cash flows for years 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10, and then you discount it, and that's called the discount rate. What are you, the discount rate, they say, is your required return, but really the way I use it is I say, what's my cost of capital, or my opportunity cost? I have $100,000 I can put into this lease, or I can put it in a bank at 4%, or maybe I can invest it in a pretty safe investment at 8%. So, you know, oftentimes people are using an 8%, somewhere between 6, 7, 8, or 9% as their discount rate. But let's use 8%. A lot of our funds offer 8% preferred return, so I like to think of that as my required rate of return. Excel will help you out a lot here, and I guess maybe in today's world, probably ChatGPT, you can plug in your assumptions and they'll probably help you build it out as well. But you use your NPV formula in Excel, and let's say we use an 8% discount rate. Now you build out your budget, like what's your baseline budget at $20 a foot with the 4 months of downtime and the $15 a foot and tenant improvement allowance. You bring that out 10 years and you do the same with the deal, and then you apply the NPV formula, and it'll give you a whole dollar number of, hey, this is the net present value of the proposed deal, and this is the net present value of the budgeted deal. So then that's going to really help you, your asset manager and your owner make a decision, which one do you really want to go with. And that works with if you're comparing multiple deals side by side as well. Or let's just say, you know, if you had a limited amount of capital and you wanted to know which, you know, deal to go with across 2 vacancies, perhaps, which one's going to give you a higher net present value. So that's a quick lesson in net present value. Hey guys, another plug here for SAGLO. So we own community shopping centers across Florida, Atlanta, Maryland. So I don't know if people that are watching this, if you represent any retailers, but oftentimes we do have some shopping centers that have spaces available. And we're looking for really strong operators that would like to open up their business in our properties. We're in Miami. We are in Tampa, Orlando. We're on the Space Coast of Florida, which is Melbourne. We're in Jacksonville. We're also in Atlanta, and then we are right outside of DC and Baltimore in Carroll County, Maryland. So the town is called Eldersburg. So if you do have any retailers that you're working with, please check out our portfolio. You can go to our website, www.saglo.com. SAGLO is spelled S-A-G-L-O. I'm Hugh Chen, president of the company, and hope you're enjoying the video so far. TIA stands for Tenant Improvement Allowance. What is that? That is the amount of money that landlords provide to new tenants to help with the build out of their space. It's essentially a construction allowance. And that's a negotiated term, and it usually still has to pencil out in between the rent, the term of the lease, how many years of the lease, and how much that they're contributing. So where does this come into play? So for example, if you're taking a space, let's say you're a tenant, a retail tenant, and you're taking a vacancy, but the vacancy is in like a raw condition, meaning that there's no ceiling grid, there's no bathrooms, there's very little, inside. It's been cleared out. Oftentimes in that situation, the landlord could spend the money to fix up the space to better lease it, but they don't know what kind of use is going to take it. So in that case, they probably would earmark like a certain per square foot dollar amount that they would have spent to bring the space at least to a vanilla shell condition. Let's say $15 to $35 a square foot, depending on what you're starting with, and maybe that amount of money 15 to 35 per square foot is your tenant improvement allowance, and maybe that's fits within the budget. And assuming if the rent is also within budget, you may have a deal. There are some uses that require a lot more tenant improvement allowance. For example, I think like the salon suites is it's very common that they ask for a tremendous amount of tenant improvement allowance, because the cost to build all those salon suites and bring in the plumbing and all of that is quite a bit of money. So for a salon suites deal, it's not uncommon to hear the potential tenant say, hey, I want $80 or maybe $100 a square foot in tenant improvement allowance. Now that might sound a lot, and it is a lot of money, and a lot of landlords would just not provide it. But oftentimes you're also looking to see what is the total amount of money that that tenant is investing in the space. Perhaps they're investing $200 a square foot or $300 a square foot, not including FF&E, which I covered earlier. And in that case, then the landlord's really putting in a third or maybe half of that cost. But from the landlord side, it's an investment in the space and in the tenant, because once the tenant leaves, then they're still left with the improvements. But the landlord has to think, well, number one, do they have the capital or the cash available to even give it? Oftentimes, if they don't, they can, when they sign that new lease, they can approach their lender and maybe have some sort of loan modification that they can draw upon, or increase the proceeds because they increase the value of the property through the new lease. They have to look at what's the likelihood that the tenant's going to be there for those 10 years or 5 years or however many years, and that they're going to be able to make the money back, because the worst case scenario would be you give this big tenant improvement allowance, thinking that you're getting a 10-year deal, but then the financials of the tenant aren't so strong, or maybe they are strong, but they go out of business in 2 years, and now you're really behind the 8 ball, because that construction that tenant put in there is worth a lot to that particular tenant, like a salon suites, but it may not be worth much at all to other tenants. Like I've seen it all the time. Like a restaurant might, spend $1 million in a space, and then when they leave, the next restaurant comes in and rips everything out and puts in their $1 million after that, which is kind of crazy, but it's true. And this tenant improvement allowance certainly gets factored into all of your formulas and calculations to see if you want to do the deal. Like I mentioned earlier, the NPV, that the tenant improvement allowance is an upfront cost, and you have to see if that's something that still pencils out from an NPV or an IRR calculation standpoint. So that's about all I got to say about LOI. So LOI stands for Letter of Intent. And what that is it is a document that's essentially like a proposal to lease. Either the tenant will send you it on their form, or you're sending it on your form if you're a landlord. And this letter of intent can be anywhere from 2 pages to maybe 10 or 20 pages, but it's supposed to be a little bit of a shorter document, and it's supposed to focus on just the business terms of the lease that you're negotiating up front. Because the thought is, once you negotiate the business terms of the lease, then that part's been ironed out, and you can move to a legal form, the actual lease form, where the attorneys kind of negotiate it out as far as the legalese is concerned. But anything material as far as business terms, such as the length of the lease, the rent, the base rent, the common area maintenance costs, the annual increases, who's the guarantor, what entity signing the lease, what entity is the landlord, the square footage of the space, the bay number, all of that stuff. There's other things like security deposit, prepaid rent, and the use clause, which is very important. You want to make sure you have a very dialed in use clause. But then The letter of intent can also include some of these other items such as use restrictions, co-tenancy, and all sorts of other stuff that is a little bit maybe non-standard in a boilerplate retail commercial lease. With the letter of intent, I've seen it mostly handled with the landlord's leasing associate and perhaps the tenant's tenant rep broker, but I have also seen it handled with an attorney in some cases. But oftentimes it's supposed to be short enough and simple enough that it's you can negotiate it without an attorney because it's just business terms. It's also usually non-binding. At the end of it, it says that this is non-binding, and it's just to make sure that everyone acknowledges what we agreed to in one written document. So that's that as well. But that's usually a great first step in the leasing process. And once you get the letter of intent signed, then you move on to the lease. PSF stands for per square foot. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's often used to describe what is the per square foot increment of something. For example, a lot of times the rent in commercial leases are quoted in a per square foot number. So in Miami it could be 50 a square foot, in Tampa it could be 40 a square foot, and so forth. And that's at least in Florida, that per square foot number is annual. But in places like California, it could be a per square foot number monthly. And the reason why that's important is because when you're comparing multiple spaces, and a retailer is looking at somewhere, let's say between 2,000 square feet and 4,000 square feet, you have a lot of varying sizes of spaces. So the actual monthly rent might be vastly different depending on the amount of space that you're taking. But if you wanted to find out what does it cost per unit, per square foot, that gives you a little bit of an apples to apples comparison as far as what's the cost of that space. Because naturally a bigger space usually costs the same, a little bit more money, assuming that it's the same quality of commercial real estate. Also, your tenant improvement allowance is usually quoted in a per square foot number, and it's just a metric that you see very often, and at least in the United States. I think in Europe and in other countries they might use a per meter type of metric, or maybe even in Canada, I'm not too sure. GLA, that stands for gross leasable area. So where that comes into play, if you're looking at a shopping center to acquire, oftentimes you're looking at the size of a property and the square footage, and what is that gross leasable area. And in the retail business, we don't really have a common area factor. So like, for example, in office buildings, they have like a 15 or a 20% common area factor. So your rentable area could be a lot different than your usable area, for example. But in the retail business, your gross leasable area is just measured in a standard way, which is it's measured to BOMA standards, which I mentioned before in an earlier video, and it can be applied to be used for the vacant space itself and occupied space. Oftentimes you're asking, hey, what's the gross leasable area of your portfolio size? For example, Saglo has, we own and manage almost 2.5 million square feet of gross leasable area, as opposed to square feet of land or something like that. But it's a pretty straightforward term, and you'll see it very often in our business. ADA, what does that stand for? That stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And how does that relate to commercial real estate, specifically for shopping centers? Is that the shopping centers that you have, if you're in operations, you always have to pay attention to make sure that, to the best of your ability, or I think it's to achievable standards, that you can keep your property at whatever the current ADA standards are. And what that is that it has to be accessible by people in wheelchairs and with other handicaps. So when you have a ramp to get from one level to another, it has to have no greater of a certain amount of incline or a slope. There needs to be certain handrails. The bathrooms have to be a certain size so that wheelchairs can turn around. And a lot of those other requirements, I think signs themselves have to be posted and of a certain height, or no greater than a certain height, or no less than a certain height, etc. There's a lot of professional services that can evaluate your property to figure out if you are in ADA compliance or not, and if you're not, what you can do to try to remedy it. In some cases, with very old properties, it's just not readily remedied unless you knock down the whole property and build new. So I think there are some accommodations if it's just impossible to achieve. So that's ADA. LLC and Inc. What do they stand for? Limited Liability Company and Corporation or Incorporated. So what does that mean in terms of retail leasing and commercial real estate? It's really thinking of it specifically from leasing. You have to think of it as that's usually the entity that's signing the lease or guaranteeing the lease. And when you're looking at LLCs and Incs, you have to look at them a little bit differently, in that oftentimes LLCs can be a pass-through entity, which means that there's many cases where there might be a tenant with 20 locations, but each location is its own LLC, and then that income's passed through to the parent corporation, which is usually a corporation. And so when you have an LLC as a entity for the tenant, you want to be maybe a little bit more, you want to look a little bit closer to find out what assets that LLC actually has that's guaranteeing the lease, how many other locations is under that LLC, etc. Where more often Inc. You might have multiple locations all under that corporation. And also there's, from an accounting standpoint, which I won't really get into, there's key differences between LLC and Inc., as well as shareholders and things like that. So, but just for leasing, I think that when you see LLC, just make sure that if it's a single location LLC, you're getting a strong guarantee coming behind that. If it's an Inc., you also have to get the financials, but it's more likely that it's going to be a stronger entity. And that's my 2 cents on it. SNDA, that stands for Subordination, Non-Disturbance, and Attornment. This is a legal document that is a part of a lot of the loan docs of landlords when they go and borrow money to buy or refinance a property, including a shopping center. And the reason why that's there is because the lenders want to make sure that all of the leases of the shopping center or the commercial property are subordinate to the mortgage. That the mortgage has first lien rights, and that's very important for the lender, because if they don't have that, you're definitely not getting a loan for the property. The tenants know that, the landlords know that, so it's a very common document to have as part of the lender docs. But also within the lease, there are things that can be written in the lease that make the lease automatically self-subordinating. But if it's not in there, a lot of the tenants understand that they will have to sign an SNDA if presented one, as long as certain things are met, which is that they can subordinate their lease, but that they're not going to be disturbed, or they're not going to be kicked out of their lease in the event that the lender or the property owner defaults on their loan, and then the lender has to come in as the property owner and manages it for a period of time. And that's kind of where the SNDA kicks in. So the worst case scenario is that the borrower, the landlord or borrower from the bank defaults on the loan, and then the bank has to foreclose and come in and act as the new owner of the property for a period of time. Well, if you have the SNDA in place, the tenants know, look, my lease is subordinate to the mortgage. The bank coming in is my new landlord. I send the rent to the bank, and that the lender cannot change the terms of my lease unilaterally. So it offers the protection both ways, and that's what it is. I'm kind of describing it from a non-attorney, non-banker point of view, but that's essentially what the SNDA is. Thank you. IRR. It stands for Internal Rate of Return, and it's a term that is used very often in commercial real estate, especially our industry, the shopping center industry. And it's used probably more often in both asset management and in capital markets, maybe a little bit less often in leasing, but it's very important to know how it plays into the investment in leasing to help you structure deals better, or to just understand why certain deals get approved and certain deals don't get approved, or why the owner or the asset manager is asking for a little bit of modification of the terms of the deal. Essentially, what IRR is it is the annualized rate of return for all cash flows over a period of time, meaning all the money that you put in, which is negative cash flow because you invested money, and all the money that you get out, which is positive cash flow over a period of time. And it can be 3, 5, 10 years. Oftentimes for capital markets, they're looking at it either at a 5-year or a 10-year horizon. Sometimes when you work with these companies that are buying and selling very quickly, maybe they're looking at it over a 2 to 3 year horizon. So I can probably get in really deep into this, so I'm not sure if I want to or not on this video, because I could probably do a whole video just on IRR. But I've heard one way to put it is that the IRR is, remember NPV that we talked about last video? So that's the net present value. If you were to take the net present value, including the basis, the negative money that you put in, and the residual value, like your sale, if you were to sell the property, your exit value, and what you get out, the IRR is equivalent to if the discount rate for that NPV, so that the NPV is 0. So if that makes any sense. So it's a little bit complex. That's why I want to do the own video on it. But in general, a shorter time period is probably going to give you a higher IRR. A longer time period will give you a lower IRR in general, and also it's kind of like how efficient are you using your money, because it doesn't really measure whole dollar values, meaning that an IRR for a small deal might yield, or a small deal might yield a very high IRR, for example, and you're getting, a very efficient use of your money on a much smaller deal. But a bigger deal for a longer time horizon, you might have a lower IRR, but you're getting a lot more money over that, like actual dollars. You're getting a lot more, but maybe it's a little bit less efficient use of your investment, but you're just getting a lot more money over that time period. Maybe I will get into a quick example on leasing. So if you're looking at leasing a multi-tenant shopping center, you have to understand how your landlord is looking at it, what time horizon, right? And then you have to think of like the residual value, meaning that let's start with that. Like think of it, you have a basis going in, your property owner invested maybe $200 a square foot to buy the property, and let's say the rent that you're proposing to get across the board for the center is maybe $30 a square foot, for example. If your hold period is 5 years and the exit cap is 5%, for example, then I think that your residual value would be about $600 per square foot. So you bought it for $200, your residual $600, you're getting $30 a square foot along the way. Then the question is, how much did it cost you to get the deal? Maybe you had to invest, $80 a square foot. So now, that's within the cash flow analysis, and there's commissions involved and things like that. So then what is the IRR on that deal, right? So that's like one example. So IRR as it pertains to leasing, like the leasing associate, the things that you need to know is that the residual value, or the value of the property when you're about to sell it, that's very important. Like, because you have your rent, like let's say it's $30 a square foot, but then what is the exit cap rate, right? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it 7%? And you're wondering, well, how do people determine it? It really is a couple of things. It's the quality of the tenant itself, like how attractive is the tenant in financials and their history operating at the property. How much do they invest into the space itself? Like, what's the likelihood that cash flow is going to remain solid for the next 10 years after when you go and sell the property? So if you're selling, if it's Chick-fil-A, like I don't think there's been a Chick-fil-A that went out of business, or very few. So they're like, wow, this Chick-fil-A is locked in. But if you're selling an Office Depot, maybe there's been a lot of Office Depots that closed, so that income stream's a little bit less steady or less secure. So that's your exit value. So when your landlord pushes you on the quality of the tenant, he's probably thinking, well, what's the value of my, or she, is the value of my property when I go exit the property, and what cap rate can I use to capitalize that income? Because that's a huge swing of it. The stuff that happens in between, you're getting $30 a square foot. That's very good. Also, that's your yield, which I'll talk about in a future video. But also so you got your exit value, the rent in between, and then in the beginning you have your build out cost, your leasing commissions, your downtime, and then what you actually paid for the property. And what you paid for a property is probably the biggest number, which is why they say that you make your money when you buy the property. But also what you're investing in the property, that's like adding to your basis essentially, because it's just more of a negative number. And that's why landlords are often just really pushing back on really big TI dollar amounts, unless they plan on recapitalizing it very quickly, meaning like refining and taking it back out or selling the property or something like that. Anyway, it can be a huge topic. I'll do my own its own video sometime in the future after I do the answer key series. So look out for that. Hey everybody, so we're getting close to the end of this compilation video. Again, this is just a ton of my other videos stitched together into one long 1 hour and 15-minute video. Just to help with the algorithm, if you could subscribe, comment below, reshare, share it to maybe some students, share it to some coworkers that are just starting out that you think that this could be of use to them, that would be really appreciated. And I'm going to be dropping additional content later on. I try to upload content once or twice a week, and it'll be of similar style, covering essentially all the stuff in commercial real estate, the shopping center industry, and a little bit about entrepreneurship and business. Thanks for watching. CAGR, that stands for Compounded Annual Growth Rate, and sometimes that's referred to as CAGR. And what is that in commercial real estate? It is the growth rate on average between the beginning and the end over a period of time. For example, what you would need would be that, let's say your rental rate was $30 a square foot in the beginning, and then 10 years, and then it grows, let's say 3% a year over 10 years. The end would be some much larger number, maybe 40 a square foot, I'm not too sure. And then the amount of time would be 10 years. And if you were to run that calculation, you would get the CAGR over that. And it doesn't really measure the stuff in between. So that's a big difference between some of the other formulas. It just measures the beginning, the end, and the amount of time in between. And so why is that important, or how is that used in the commercial real estate industry? It just gives people an idea, or investors or asset managers an idea of what's like a very simplistic growth rate from start to finish without looking at the noise in between. And the noise in between is important because a lot of it is like how much money you invested, and then there could be spikes and dips and things like that. But it's a quick ratio that just helps you out in doing a quick evaluation. I see it a lot in investment sales offering memorandums, where you might see that like an investment sales broker is saying, hey, this shopping center has a really good CAGR. It's about 4% or 5% or something like that, which means on average it's growing by 4% per year, which is much higher than inflation, for example. If you have a lease that's 3% annual increases over that 10-year time period, and I did the calculation earlier, using the formula, your CAGR would be about 2.75%. However, if you were to do a lease that was flat for 5 years, 15% increase, and then flat for 5 years again, then your formula using the CAGR would be about 1.41%. So you can really see the difference between 15% every 5 years versus 3% per year. I often see when I'm looking at an offering memorandum that the investment sales broker is advertising, hey, there's a CAGR of 4% for 10 years, for example, meaning that the compounded annual growth rate for 10 years is 4%, which is very strong. Oftentimes I'm seeing the number somewhere between 1% to 5 or 6% on the very high end. A lot of the times when we're looking at properties to buy, we're seeing a CAGR of 2 to 3%, and we're comfortable with that. So if you're selling a shopping center and your CAGR is 2 to 3%, send it to us. We might take a run at it. So a higher compounded annual growth rate is better if you are trying to buy a shopping center and increase the value of it, meaning, or I guess a projected higher CAGR. And so that is why a lot of the asset managers and the landlords push the leasing associates to just build in higher annual increases as opposed to flat and then like 10% bump in year 5 or something like that, because they want to be able to show blended across their rent roll a higher CAGR number percentage. And that's CAGR. It works a little different than NPV and IRR. Like IRR, oftentimes you're striving for a number that's north of 10%, and then NPV it's actually not even a percent, it's a dollar amount. So those work a little bit different, and they have a little bit different functionality. So that's your lesson on CAGR. HVAC. That stands for heating, air conditioning, and ventilation. And so that is basically your air conditioning for the space. And in retail shopping centers, they're typically on the roof. I have seen them in the back on the floor or on the ground of a shopping center before. And they are always measured in terms of tonnage, meaning that if you have a 1,000 square foot space, it's very common that that's serviced by a 3-ton unit. For dry retail, oftentimes the ratio of amount of tons that you need per square footage is something like, for every 300 or 400 square feet, you need 1 ton of HVAC. However, if you have like a restaurant, or maybe even a gym or something that produces a lot of heat inside, you might need to have, or there's a lot more people, you might need to have more tonnage for the same amount of square footage. So for example, for restaurants, it may be 150 square feet per ton, or yeah, something like that. As far as the cost, that's a fairly big ticket item. As of today, which is summer 2025, I'm hearing something on the magnitude of like $3,000 per ton installed. And when you're looking at HVAC, you want to, and you're trying to price it out, and if it's going on the roof, just know that they have to have a crane. They crane it up onto the roof. It has to have like a pad, an HVAC pad, for it to go on top of. And then addition to that, usually not priced in that $3,000 a ton, is like HVAC distribution. That's like the ductwork within the space itself, and then the vents and all that stuff. But that gets pretty technical, but that's HVAC, and it's a part of our retail leasing. REA, that stands for Reciprocal Easement Agreement, and it sometimes is referred to as a declaration, or it is referred to as ECR. And essentially what it is it's a recorded document that runs with the land that governs how, if multiple properties are adjacent to each other but are essentially the same project. For example, if you have a Walmart supercenter where Walmart owns their own parcel of land and building, and then you're adjacent to it, so you own a 50,000 square foot shopping center. By the way, we own a couple of those in Florida. And then let's say there's a few out parcels in front, but the out parcels are all owned by separate entities, different people, actually, not even entities, just different owners. You'll have, let's say, 5 landlords or 5 property owners that are the same, that part of the same project. It's almost like an HOA or a condo association. And so there needs to be rules where, hey, there's one entryway into the project. It might be on Walmart's land, it might be on the Shadow Shopping Center's land, our land. It might be, on one of the out parcels lands. And so how is that access point shared? Can the Walmart shoppers park on any of the parking spaces? Does all of the parcels need to have 4 per 1,000 or up to code parking ratios? And also very important for leasing would be that, is there any use restrictions that run with the land? Because I think that a lot of leasing people, when they're looking to see if they can lease to a certain type of use in a vacancy, they know to go to the use restrictions for all the other tenants, or maybe the anchor tenants or something like that. But there's also, could be, if your property has a REA in place, other use restrictions, or other, not even just use restrictions, but just restrictions on the land that run with the land. So that's all publicly recorded, and it's called an REA agreement. And you can change those. The same way that you would go to an anchor to see if you can amend it, but in the case of the REA, you likely, it's really spelled out within the document itself, but likely you'll have to get everyone on board and sign off on any changes. Some stuff that's not really leasing but more development is the cross easements also with utilities. So there might be utility lines that run through multiple properties in the same project, and so that's the access to maintain those lines, how that works and things like that. Also in an REA agreement, very famously would be one that governs regional malls, like enclosed malls, where Sears and JCPenney and Macy's, and then rest of the mall, they're all tied together by some sort of declaration or some sort of recorded document. There's language in there that might say, hey, you know, it has to be a certain type of look or a certain type of use for the property for forever, and it won't change unless everyone signs off on it. And so that's been like a point of contention between the mall owner and maybe Sears or maybe Macy's, where they want to keep it, you know, very retail, where the mall owner wants to maybe do a mixed use or something. Anyways, that's your explanation of REA. The REA also manages the expenses of the common areas that are shared. So there might be some shared maintenance agreement or something like that, where one of the properties of the project maintains the vast majority of the common areas, and then there could be some expense sharing details in there. For example, every property owner in that project pays their proportionate share of parking lot maintenance, for example, and that's an important part of it as well. ROFO and ROFR stands for right of first offer and right of first refusal. And I think that you probably hear ROFR more often, right of first refusal. And the way that works is that that's often put in many retail leases where maybe there's an adjacent space that's currently occupied, like a tenant takes a space, and then there's an adjacent space that is currently occupied, but that one tenant that took the space might want to eventually expand into. And so they put in something called a ROFR, or the right of first refusal. And what it might say is, if this space ever becomes available, before you lease it out to somebody else, you have to give us the right to make, to say, no, I don't want it. Or I guess the right of first offer is you have to give us the first right to try to lease it before you give anyone else a chance to lease it. Also, where you see this come in very often is Publix actually has a right of first refusal to buy the shopping centers that they're in. So, meaning that if there's a investor that owns a Publix anchored shopping center, that when they go and try to sell the property, Publix has a chance to try to beat the highest offer, and they have to, where the landlord, or not the landlord, the property owner can say, okay, Publix, for you to buy it, it has to be this price, and you get the right to a first refusal. You can tell me no, or you can tell me yes. And so that's probably one of the more common cases of using a ROFR nowadays, especially in the capital markets. But in leasing, it could be for adjacent space or, something like that.
Tenant mix like brush to paint. It's part instinct, part constraint. It's science and art in every square. Find the fit and values there. Sales go up when the match is right, then rents increase without a fight. Success for them